They blocked him from boarding, questioned his ticket, and called for backup, all while ignoring the fact that he held the keys to a $48 million contract with their airline. There was nothing out of place about Dorian Brandt that morning. His suit was pressed. His collar sat perfectly on his neck. He moved through JFK's Terminal 4 like someone used to early mornings and late meetings. In his left hand, he held a dark leather garment bag. In his right, a first-class boarding pass bound for San Francisco. He was flying out for the Western Produce Sustainability Summit, where he was scheduled to deliver the keynote speech. At 58, Dorian had done this routine too many times to count. He wasn't the kind of man who needed attention. He preferred quiet efficiency. But that morning, something snapped in the air the moment he reached Gate 17. The line to board hadn't yet formed. A few people were hovering nearby, sipping coffee, scrolling their phones. Dorian walked up to the desk calmly, gave a polite nod to the young woman at the gate, and handed her his boarding pass. She didn't scan it. Instead, she looked up at him, and looked again. Slower this time. The kind of look people give when they're not sure whether to speak or stall. Dorian waited. No rush in his posture, no question in his eyes. "This lane is for premium passengers only," she said with a sharpness that didn't match the situation. "I know," Dorian said evenly. She blinked, scanned the boarding pass, finally, and paused. Her hand hovered over the scanner but didn't click. Instead, she looked back at him, then to a colleague behind her, whispering something that made the other woman peek over her shoulder. Dorian didn't flinch. She turned back. "I'm going to need to see some ID," she said. He tilted his head just slightly. "You don't usually ask for ID when scanning a pass. Is there a problem?" She hesitated. "It's just a security measure." There was no policy requiring ID checks at the gate. He knew it. So did she. He pulled his wallet from his inside pocket, handed over his license. She held it like she didn't know what to do with it, then placed it awkwardly on the desk without scanning anything. "Wait here for a moment." Dorian glanced down at the pass. His name was printed clearly. Dorian Brandt. He said nothing. The gate agent walked a few steps away and whispered again, this time to someone in a dark uniform. Within moments, a security officer was walking toward them. Dorian had experienced this before. Not often, but enough. The sudden switch from professionalism to suspicion. The moment someone decided he didn't belong. Not because of anything he said or did, just because they couldn't imagine someone like him in first class. The security officer didn't ask questions. He stood beside Dorian without speaking. His eyes tracked him like a risk assessment checklist. Dorian, still calm, stepped back from the gate and moved to the side, away from the boarding lane. He wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to raise his voice. He wasn't going to give them the performance they were hoping for. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a single call. It rang once, twice. Then, "Maggie, it's me. I need you to pull up the catering contract we signed with Horizon Air 2 weeks ago, the one covering their western routes." "Yeah, I'm standing at JFK, Gate 17. I'll hold." He stayed on the line, eyes fixed straight ahead. No emotion, no visible frustration. The gate agent glanced over, realizing he was still there. She leaned into the mic on the desk. "We're just working through a minor issue," she said to the crowd of passengers now beginning to line up behind him. "Thanks for your patience." But no one was being patient. A businessman in a grey pullover leaned forward to whisper, "Is he causing trouble or something?" Dorian heard it. He didn't turn around. Maggie's voice returned on the phone. "Got it. You want me to call corporate or—" "No," he said softly. "Just flag it. I think they're about to recognize a problem." He hung up and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The boarding pass was still in his hand. He stood calmly, as if waiting for an elevator. But that call wasn't to complain. It was to warn. Dorian Brandt didn't always wear tailored suits or fly first class. He grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, in a house with soft floorboards and louder mornings. His mother, Eunice, worked the produce section at a local grocery store, while his father, Leonard, rotated between night shifts at the mill and weekends fixing neighbors' cars. They didn't have much, but there was always food on the table, and Dorian was taught early that the way you carry yourself matters. At 15, he was up at 5 a.m. on Saturdays, helping his mother sort through crates of fruits and vegetables before the store opened. It was where he learned to tell a ripe melon by touch, how to spot a spoiled apple from 10 feet away, and most importantly, how to talk to people. Not talk at them, talk to them. There's a difference, and Dorian figured it out fast. By 23, he'd graduated from Kent State with a degree in agricultural business and exactly $300 to his name. His first business was a roadside produce stand just outside Columbus. He didn't have employees, not even part-time help, just a borrowed pickup, a tent, and enough determination to sell sweet corn like it was gold. The real shift happened in his early 30s when he spotted a gap no one else was paying attention to. Sustainably grown, regionally sourced produce that could scale to meet grocery chain demands without sacrificing quality. Not boutique, not farmer's market, just real food, grown clean, delivered fast. Brandt Global Foods was born in a rented garage with one delivery route and a laptop that crashed twice a week. He made deals directly with farms across the Midwest and slowly built a network. It took nearly 15 years before his company got a seat at the table with national suppliers. Today, Brandt Global Foods supplies over 30 high-end grocery chains, 5 university systems, and, most recently, Horizon Air. The airline had come to him. They were looking to reinvent their in-flight meals after a string of bad press and disappointing customer surveys. Dorian didn't pitch, he listened. Then he gave them a plan. Seasonal produce rotations, direct farm-to-airline sourcing, and packaging that cut waste by half. They signed a $48 million contract. But Dorian never lost sight of who he was. He didn't decorate his office with awards or hang plaques in the lobby. If you walked into his building in Dayton, you'd see framed photos of his original produce stand and a wall covered in thank you notes from farmers. His assistant Maggie handled the logistics. Dorian handled the people. He also didn't like drama. He avoided attention. And above all, he didn't talk about power. He just used it quietly when needed. So when the gate agent at JFK scanned his face more than his boarding pass, and the security guard treated him like a potential problem instead of a paying customer, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a reminder. A reminder that it didn't matter how many contracts he signed or how many planes he helped stock. Some people only see what they expect to see. And when you don't fit the image they've built in their heads, they start looking for reasons to question you. But Dorian didn't need to raise his voice to prove his worth. He had spent a lifetime letting his actions do the speaking. That call he made at gate 17, that wasn't the beginning of a problem. That was him offering the airline a chance to fix it. Quietly. Because while Dorian Brandt believed in grace, he also believed in standards. But none of that mattered at gate 17. The woman at the gate didn't know who Dorian Brandt was. To her, he was just another name on a boarding pass she didn't recognize, one she'd decided didn't belong in the line he was in. Her name was Haley, mid-30s, new to the job, and eager to prove herself after transferring from Tulsa to JFK a month prior. She had strict instructions: maintain order, stick to protocol, and don't let anyone push boundaries. But what she lacked was experience and instincts. The kind that help you read a room or a person without jumping to conclusions. By now, passengers were lining up. A man in a navy windbreaker with a Bluetooth headset paced near the front. A woman with a floral carry-on stood behind him, eyeing the delay. Haley adjusted the mic on her collar and muttered something into it about needing backup. She glanced back at Dorian, who stood off to the side, relaxed but still present. Her co-worker, Mia, leaned over. "Is there actually an issue?" Haley shrugged. "He says he's first class." Mia raised an eyebrow. "His pass says he is. What's the problem?" Haley frowned. "Just doesn't feel right." That's when Mia's posture shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to send a message. Be careful. But Haley wasn't paying attention. She was focused on her screen now, pretending to search for a booking note that didn't exist. The security officer, meanwhile, stood by with arms crossed, glancing at Dorian from time to time, but offering no explanation for his presence. Passengers continued to board. The first-class lane was thinning. Haley glanced toward the gate. She looked nervous now, but didn't want to lose face. Then Dorian's phone rang. He stepped a few feet farther away to answer it. Maggie's voice was steady. "Okay, I've already sent an alert to their regional VP. I also looped in Jack Renner. He's the head of food service integration on their end." "Thank you," Dorian said quietly. "Keep me posted." He hung up. No expression on his face. Just calm. Back at the desk, Mia was getting uncomfortable. She pulled Haley out. "Do you realize who he is?" she whispered. "That's Dorian Brandt. I saw his company on the vendor list last week. The new produce deal with Horizon." Haley's stomach turned. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, he owns Brandt Global Foods. They're working with us." Haley's mouth went dry. She looked back at Dorian, who hadn't moved. His boarding pass still in hand. No expression of anger. No confrontation. "Maybe we should just board him now," Mia offered. But Haley panicked. "No, if we do it now, it looks like we—" She was cut off by a voice in her earpiece. A supervisor. "Haley, I need a status on the hold at gate 17. We're showing a delay flag." She froze. "Just handling a passenger issue, but it's under control." The supervisor didn't sound convinced. "Make sure it is. We've got execs from corporate flying in this morning. No surprises." Haley tried to steady her hands. She looked over at Dorian again. His calm made her feel smaller by the second. She wasn't dealing with a problem. She was becoming one. Mia turned toward him, ready to apologize, but just then, the boarding door beeped. Another passenger stepped through. A man in khakis glanced back and said, "What's going on with the holdup?" Haley didn't answer. Her voice had disappeared. Then Dorian took a slow step forward, not toward the desk, but to the glass wall overlooking the runway. He stood there, hands folded behind his back, watching a line of luggage carts move past. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't anxious. He was watching time work in his favor. Haley was watching it run out. But the people in charge were already on their way. 10 floors above the airport terminal, in an office that overlooked the tarmac and the Manhattan skyline beyond it, Cynthia Reyes was halfway through a croissant and a quarterly operations report when her desk phone rang. She didn't usually take calls from unknown numbers, but this one had been forwarded twice, and her assistant flagged it as urgent. "This is Cynthia," she answered. "Hi, Cynthia. Maggie Geller calling on behalf of Dorian Brandt, CEO of Brandt Global Foods. We've just been alerted to an incident involving Mr. Brandt at Gate 17. Cynthia sat up a little straighter. "What kind of incident?" Maggie's voice remained professional. "Your staff seems to have denied him boarding despite his first-class ticket. We're concerned it may escalate." Cynthia didn't waste time asking for details. She had seen Dorian's name enough to know the stakes. Horizon Air had only recently finalized its supplier contracts for the next fiscal year, and Brandt Global wasn't just any vendor. They were the vendor. They were supposed to help overhaul the airline's entire food service image after a disastrous social media campaign exposed their frozen meals and wasteful packaging. This wasn't just bad customer service, it was a live fire inside a room full of gas. "I'll handle it," Cynthia said quickly, standing up and motioning to her assistant. "Is he still at the gate?" "He is. Calm, but clearly being mishandled." Cynthia was already out of her office, jacket in hand, heels echoing down the hallway. She turned to her assistant. "Get me Sean and Elise from Brand Protection, now!" Meanwhile, down at corporate headquarters in Minneapolis, Jack Renner's phone rang during a working lunch. "Jack," Maggie said, skipping formalities. "Dorian's being detained at the gate. JFK. Horizon staff flagged him for no reason." Jack nearly dropped his fork. "You've got to be kidding me." "Nope. He called it in personally." Jack pushed back from the table. "I'll get Cynthia on it. She's already moving. You might want to prep legal just in case." He didn't respond, just hung up and started dialing. If this went public, it could dismantle months of work on the new campaign rollout. There were press releases scheduled, launch videos in editing. Dorian Brandt was going to be featured in their fall Fresh Flight initiative as a face of modern food sustainability. That face was now being sidelined at an airport gate by someone who didn't know who they were dealing with. At gate 17, Haley was beginning to sweat. She could feel the shift, not just from Mia's icy silence, but from the passengers who were now openly murmuring about the delay. People were pulling out their phones, checking the flight status. Still no boarding. Then, without warning, a man in a navy suit and a Horizon ID badge walked briskly toward the gate, followed by a woman in red heels with a phone still pressed to her ear. Cynthia. She ended the call, lowered the phone slowly, and surveyed the scene. Dorian didn't move. He watched her approach but didn't step forward. He knew exactly who she was. Cynthia extended her hand, calm but direct. Mr. Brandt, I'm Cynthia Reyes, Executive Director of Regional Operations. May I speak with you privately? Dorian nodded once, finally slipping his phone back into his pocket. Of course. They stepped a few feet away. Behind them, Haley stood frozen, unsure whether to follow or disappear. Cynthia took a breath. Mr. Brandt, on behalf of Horizon Air, I want to apologize. I've already contacted our internal team to look into the situation. This should not have happened. I'd like to escort you personally onto the flight. Dorian didn't react. He simply asked, Do you know what seat I was assigned? She checked her tablet. Seat 1A. He smiled faintly. First row. Interesting. I was told this lane was for premium passengers only. Cynthia didn't blink. Again, I apologize. Dorian leaned in slightly. The issue isn't the mistake, Ms. Reyes. It's the assumption behind it. She swallowed hard. Understood. But Dorian wasn't looking for payback. He was waiting for the truth. Haley stood behind the gate desk, motionless. Her headset was still clipped to her collar, but she wasn't speaking into it anymore. She watched Cynthia and Dorian standing a few feet away, their conversation too quiet to hear, but loud enough to change everything. Passengers had stopped boarding. The monitors still showed the flight on time, but nothing was moving. Mia avoided looking in Haley's direction. She didn't need to. Everyone at the gate already knew something was wrong. Cynthia turned to wave over another man. Tall, sandy hair, black lanyard, corporate posture. This was Justin Cole, Horizon's legal liaison for East Coast operations. He'd been briefed in the elevator and knew better than to offer explanations. He extended his hand to Dorian. Mr. Brandt, I'd like to apologize personally. I understand this experience has been... Dorian cut him off gently. I don't need an apology, Mr. Cole. I need you to explain how something like this happens after we sign a $48 million deal. Justin paused. There was no good answer, no scripted response, no PR-approved deflection. Cynthia stepped in. Mr. Brandt, we understand the weight of the situation. We're reviewing our staff conduct and sensitivity training procedures, but we'd also like to assure you this isn't a reflection of our values. Dorian raised an eyebrow. You mean it's not a reflection of the company's values? Or it's not a reflection of the gate agent's judgment? Cynthia didn't respond. He gestured toward Haley, who now looked like she might sink behind the desk. She saw a well-dressed man with a premium ticket and assumed he was in the wrong line. Not once, but repeatedly. Called for security. Escalated the moment I asked a question. You don't have to explain to me what that's about. I've lived it. Justin cleared his throat. We are prepared to issue a formal apology, should you wish, privately or publicly. Dorian's face didn't change. You think I'm here for an apology? They hesitated. He reached into his garment bag and pulled out a thin manila folder. No fanfare, just paper. This is a signed copy of our contract. My company now supplies every fresh item on your Western and Midwest routes. That includes produce used in your premium lounge services, by the way. So when I say that the person being blocked at the gate is your brand, I mean that literally. He handed the folder to Cynthia, who took it like a weight. I don't want a tweet. I don't want a letter. I want better. Because the next person you treat like a security risk for doing absolutely nothing, they might not have a direct line to your VP. Silence. Passengers nearby began whispering again. A woman in the business class lane pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll, but clearly recording. Justin shifted uncomfortably. We'll initiate an immediate review and make personnel adjustments as necessary. You have my word. Dorian looked at his watch. Good. Then we can all go about our day. Before Cynthia could escort him on board, he turned slightly and looked toward Haley. She looked pale now, holding her badge in both hands like a shield. Dorian stared at her for a second, not with anger, but with something worse. Disappointment. He didn't speak to her. He didn't need to. Cynthia waved to the flight crew, who began unblocking the gate. Dorian was led down the jet bridge with Justin quietly behind him. Back at the gate, Mia stepped beside Haley. You don't get it, she said, her voice low. That man's company puts food on half the trays you serve in first class. Haley didn't answer. But the real moment wasn't in that conversation. It was what came next. The cabin crew had already been briefed. As Dorian stepped onto the plane, he was greeted not with the usual robotic smile, but with a level of attention that felt more like a quiet apology. A flight attendant named Jordan offered to take his garment bag, and another immediately brought him a bottle of water without asking. Mr. Brandt, if there's anything you need before takeoff, Jordan said, almost under his breath. Just say the word. Dorian didn't react much. He wasn't interested in gestures. He took his seat in 1A, placed the water down without touching it, and exhaled through his nose. Not relief, just breath. Controlled and measured. Outside, something strange was happening. The terminal had come to a crawl. Passengers were now checking the boards more often. First, Gate 17's status shifted from boarding to delayed. Then, within 10 minutes, another 2 gates nearby changed to the same. A man in a grey blazer tapped on the desk at Gate 18, only to be told they were experiencing an internal systems review. It wasn't just Dorian's flight. Across the concourse, 3 more Horizon Air departures were delayed. No specific reasons, just vague language. Operational hold, technical processing, crew coordination. In truth, corporate had issued a soft shutdown. A quiet pause. Cynthia Reyes, after escorting Dorian on board, had walked straight into a secure meeting room behind the terminal. She was now on a call with legal, HR, and crisis management. The directive was clear. Before this incident spilled into the public, everything needed to be assessed. Gate logs, staff notes, internal comms. Every employee who had direct contact with Dorian that morning was being pulled aside. No one would admit it out loud, but the plane wasn't going anywhere until the company knew exactly how far the damage might go. Back on board, Dorian sat with his eyes closed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't flustered. But his calm wasn't serenity. It was experience. The kind that comes from decades of having to pretend that things don't sting just because you're used to them. He thought about his father, Leonard, who once got turned away from a car dealership because the manager said he didn't look like he could afford it. He thought about his first investor meeting in Columbus, where someone mistook him for the valet. And he thought about how, after all this time, it was still happening, just at a higher altitude. Jordan came back. Mr. Brandt, he said gently, we've been asked to delay departure briefly. They're working through something with the terminal team. We'll keep you updated. Dorian nodded once. Jordan hesitated, then added, I saw what happened out there. It wasn't right. Dorian opened his eyes. Thank you. Silence lingered for a second. Then Jordan said, I told my younger brother to watch your talk at the sustainability conference last year. He's studying agri-science. You made it feel real for him. Just thought you should know. Dorian looked at him for the first time since boarding. A small smile. Not performative, just human. I appreciate that. As Jordan walked away, the pilot stepped out of the cockpit and conferred with a senior crew member near the front. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Dorian caught a phrase. Ground hold. No idea how long. And somewhere in the back of the plane, a man groaned audibly. Figures. This airline never gets it together. Dorian didn't respond. He leaned back and watched the clouds drift outside the window. He'd done his part. The rest wasn't up to him. 20 minutes later, the internal report reached Cynthia's desk. The gate logs were clean. No threats reported. No disturbances filed. The only irregularity? A call made by the gate agent to security without documented reason. That alone was enough. By the time the flight finally began its pushback, Haley had been removed from the floor. Quietly. No announcement. No scene. Her name didn't show up on the next day's schedule. A photo surfaced that afternoon. Someone in the terminal had snapped it. Dorian standing calmly near the gate, a phone to his ear, with the caption, "He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move, but the whole airport listened." But stories like this don't always end the way you'd expect. The plane touched down in San Francisco just after 1:15 p.m. local time. Dorian was one of the last to leave the aircraft, taking his time as passengers rushed toward rideshares, baggage claims, and connections. He didn't check his phone until he was already in the back of a black Lincoln, headed toward the Marriott, where the Western Produce Sustainability Summit was already underway. The notifications were stacked. Emails from Horizon execs, a text from Maggie letting him know the legal team had reached out with a draft letter, and a link to a local news blog that had somehow picked up on the JFK incident. Nothing viral, nothing explosive. Just a quiet ripple moving through the right circles. Inside the conference ballroom, the crowd was buzzing. Dorian entered unnoticed at first, but as he made his way to the side of the stage where his keynote was scheduled, a few attendees began to recognize him. He exchanged short greetings, shook a few hands. No mention of the airport, no sympathy, just business, the way he preferred it. He took the stage 20 minutes later to a full room. His keynote wasn't about what happened at Gate 17, not directly. It was about resilience in the food supply chain, about how small assumptions in sourcing, in storage, in delivery create big consequences. He told a story about a beet farmer in Kansas who nearly lost his harvest to one missed email, and how that one email became a turning point in streamlining his company's communication systems. But toward the end, he paused. He looked out at the room. Business people, suppliers, university researchers, logistics experts, and said, "Sometimes the problem isn't the system. Sometimes it's the shortcuts we take in reading people." There was a moment of stillness. He continued, "Whether we're talking about a new grower, a supplier, or someone standing at a gate with a valid boarding pass, what we assume tells the world more about us than it does about them." That got quiet applause. Not thunderous, just real. Afterward, as Dorian walked off stage, a man from a Seattle distribution firm stopped him and said, "Hey, that thing you said about shortcuts hit me harder than I thought it would." Dorian smiled. That's where the rot starts, in the shortcuts. Back in New York, Cynthia Reyes sat in her office reviewing a report from the internal audit team. Haley's file had been flagged, but Dorian hadn't asked for her to be fired. He hadn't asked for compensation. He hadn't even responded to the offer for a written apology to share publicly. He didn't need to. The airline's senior staff knew exactly what had happened, and they knew exactly how close they'd come to losing more than a contract. In the following weeks, Horizon quietly announced a new partnership with a civil rights advisory group focused on workplace sensitivity and bias prevention. A few press outlets connected the dots. Dorian was mentioned once, indirectly, in a quote from a Horizon spokesperson. "Recent events reminded us of the work that still needs to be done." Dorian didn't comment. He didn't post. He didn't retweet. He went back to work. And when Maggie asked if he wanted to talk to the press after GQ reached out for an interview request, he said, "Tell them I'm busy feeding people." Weeks passed, then months. And yet the story lingered. Not because it exploded online, but because people remembered it. People who were in the terminal that morning told it over dinner. People who saw the photo of him standing still with a phone to his ear started using it in presentations about silent leadership. People who worked at Horizon Air, they whispered about it in break rooms. Gate agents started thinking twice before assuming, before reaching for a headset, before calling for backup without reason. And somewhere in Ohio, a retired grocery worker named Eunice Brandt read the article online, smiled to herself, and said aloud in her kitchen, "That's my son." Sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more stories that matter.